Hi, I'm Steve Wong, a resource specialist with Crescendo. I'm a pastor, and part of my background is in developmental psychology and spiritual formation. I have a PhD in psychology, and I'm a trained and practicing spiritual director. My mother was a CEF missionary, Child Evangelism Fellowship. So she taught me a lot of Bible stories. One of the ones that sticks in my head is the flannel graph lesson, if you remember flannel graph, of Paul and Silas singing in prison. Paul and Silas had gone to the city of Philippi to preach the gospel. They were followed around by a slave girl who was possessed by a demon. The girl disrupted their preaching by shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved." So Luke tells us that she kept this up for days. And finally, Paul got so annoyed with her that he cast out the demon and the girl was returned to her right mind, which was a problem because the girl had been earning money for her owners by predicting the future for people. So the owners are furious with Paul and Silas. They haul them up before the city magistrates, accuse them of sedition, in other words, telling people not to worship Caesar. The result was that Paul and Silas were beaten and then thrown into jail. As further humiliation, they had their feet put into stocks so they couldn't move and were made to be as uncomfortable as possible. I can still imagine the little flannel graph figures of Paul and Silas in stocks. What happens next? In the middle of the night, stiff and sore from their injuries, maybe unable to sleep because of the stocks, Paul and Silas started singing and worshiping God. They were expressing gratitude and joy and peace. Now press the pause button. Think about this scene. Think of the other prisoners. What are they thinking? I'm sure some of them weren't as bad off as Paul and Silas. They hadn't been beaten. They weren't in stocks. Why aren't they singing? Now, too many of us feel imprisoned like those other prisoners. We're told that we should be people of joy and gratitude and peace, but to be honest, we're not. We see examples of people who are in worse situations than ours, who are singing and worshiping God, and we wonder, how does somebody have joy and gratitude and peace that's not just a Facebook facade, but flows out of us no matter what our external circumstances? In Crescendo, we often mention Jeremiah 17:7-8. Jeremiah expands on the image of a tree planted by streams that we see in Psalm 1 and adds that this tree has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. No worries, always fruitful. How does that happen? M. Scott Peck has written about 4 stages of spiritual growth. We all start in stage 1, being self-centered. This isn't to judge people who are in this stage, but simply to say that we all start there. Babies are naturally self-centered in order to survive. They can't fend for themselves, so they have to let someone else know when they're hungry or wet. But then our parents teach us rules for how to be a good member of the family, which helps us to get along with people outside our families. Our churches teach us rules too. We learn about God and how he wants us to live. We have rules for living, and this is the first step toward knowing God. But eventually we find out that rules are not enough. In social context, simply adhering to rules makes us rigid, even hostile. In the spiritual context, we become legalistic and judgmental. And so we begin to ask questions. In our family context, we may distance ourselves from our parents, forming our own identity. We're in that stage of what Erickson calls identity formation. In the church context, it may look like we're losing our faith because we're not only distancing ourselves from our families, we're also moving away from churches and church people. We have doubts and questions, and sometimes people don't know how to answer our questions. But we're not less spiritual. Actually, we are continuing to develop. And so the 4th stage is one of surrender and trust in God. It's that time of realizing that I don't have all the answers, but I'm trusting in the God who does. Paul calls this walking by faith. Jesus said that if we are overburdened with rules, we can take up his yoke, that is, be in relationship with him, and we will find rest for our souls. He also says that if we're thirsting, we can come to him and drink, and out of us will flow rivers of water. To use the image of Jeremiah 17 and Psalm 1, we put our roots into the streams of water, and the fruit grows naturally from us, no matter what our external circumstances. And we can see all four of these stages in Paul's development. He started, of course, self-centered, but then he became a really good person about rules. He became a Pharisee. He was such a rigid, rule-based person that he persecuted anyone who did follow the same rules. That was his reason for being on the road to Damascus. And then he met Jesus. Remember the first thing he said? It was a question. Who are you, Jesus? Who are you, Lord? Paul starts to ask questions. Now, you'd think he just met Jesus, he should be enlightened, but the exact opposite happens. He's blinded. And the resolution to his blindness doesn't come from searching, but from waiting in the house of Judas, blinded, not doing anything. Luke says, not even eating or drinking. His sight is restored, not by his efforts, but as a gift from God through Ananias. And then the result is joy and peace. It doesn't come from Paul, it flows through him from God. It's not dependent on outward circumstances like being beaten and imprisoned, but it's a stream of water from within. Joy, gratitude, and peace that he expresses are the organic result of the presence of Jesus in him, the fruit of the Spirit. We even see love in Paul. His first concern is not for himself. He doesn't take the opportunity to escape prison. Instead, he realizes that the jailer is going to kill himself because his own life is forfeit if any of the prisoners escape. So Paul calls out to the jailer that all the prisoners are still there, and he ends up sharing with the jailer and his family the gift of eternal life, streams of living water that flow from within. Paul has moved from knowing about God through the laws of the rules of the Torah by saying the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ. He's become a person who transcends the bounds of any prison, to become a person who knows Jesus and naturally expresses Jesus' love and joy and peace. Developmental psychologists tell us that these stages are necessary and that we revisit them throughout life. There are tasks that don't get fully resolved in each stage. And so the place of the family and of the church is to be a context for continuing development in each stage. Crescendo coaches can help your church become that sort of place of context for continuing development. But let me ask, what about you personally? You may be feeling imprisoned by the challenges of later life, a body or even a mind that is becoming weaker, the loss of family that moves away or of friends that leave this life, other diminishing capacities that cause us to question even our relationship to God. We all want our lives to be characterized by love and joy and peace. Those characteristics come not from following rules of how to behave, but as a gift from God. So let's hear the words of Jeremiah 17, 7 and 8. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought, it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit.